Hello, everybody. Scott Stevens here with a look at Scott's weather here on the Metadime channel. Looking at what has not been too bad of weather, considering all that's going on the planet right now, and especially in the United States. The weather kind of seems like the least of your worries, unless you're dressing to go out at night and wondering what it's going to be like at midnight or 11 o'clock or 8 o'clock when the curfew kicks in, and you need to be somewhere else in a hurry. Uh, Kind of crazy world out there, and the weather in many, many ways is no different. Things are happening that we haven't seen before, and they'll likely keep happening, just like what's going on within the human realm. It's just weird. And I saw somebody's tweet the other day, and it basically showed this person carrying this big old spliff of sage. And this sage was every bit of like 12 foot long. And I was like, 2020, we're going to need a little more of this to do a little saging to clean things up. As we get to my other show, another perspective on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Mountain right here, we're going to talk about choices. Choices, why we make choices, how we make choices, information we use to make choices, and how we can make proper choices that come from a different, higher perspective rather than being reactionary and not being necessarily subjecting ourselves to simply reacting from what someone else, some other agency has done. And we feel like we need to act out in that regard because we're honestly we're more than that. We're above that. We're better than that. And sometimes that's really, really easy to forget that we are more than just what we appear to be. All right, let's pop over, take a look at a little bit of weather as viewed through the Twitter sphere. I love Twitter. Facebook's great. I'm there, but Twitter's kind of where a little more newsy things happening rather than just what Facebook has to offer. So I enjoy being over there. Dakota Smith dropping a impressive lightning show at the Pacific Northwest yesterday. Now this is nearly 24 hours old. You can see by the timestamp, 21 hours old. So we're talking about Saturday as the storms rumbled as a fairly healthy weather event rolled into California. And that providing much of the central Sierra and points northward all the way into southern Oregon, Medford, and Ashland and points along the coast, getting some good moisture. One of our famous Colorado storm chasers, Reed Tamir, a tornado moving over a lake northeast of Calgary, Alberta today. Canadian chasers, of course, are on board. And again, what do you expect when you get that far away from the states' tornado alley? You get into the high plains and you're going to be looking for any opportunity to chase severe weather. And if you're Canadian, then that's kind of a godsend to go and see those kind of things. Yes, Robin, I am so grateful it's raining, and we'll get to that in a moment here in Colorado. This is actually what the radar looked like, as it was just a little bit of a loop and it swept off towards the north and east. Something else that we're looking at, Ben Knoll, June 1st, the start of hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin. The very latest CANSIPS guidance continues to suggest a velocity pattern consistent with hyperactivity. The rising branch of the Walker circulation over Africa can energize African easterly waves. And as we know, these waves, as they roll across on that boundary, actually, it's just at the latitudes, but nevertheless, it is the boundary between the Sahara, and then the tropical zones, then push these waves across the Atlantic. And temperatures in the Atlantic are a bit above normal, not lots, but they're decidedly in the positive above the normal range. And then these waves, provided they get a proper push, can then become a concern for those that live in the Caribbean, in the eastern seaboard of the U.S., and even then down into the Gulf of Mexico in time. And we are looking at about 12 hours old. So the 0Z EPS model showing that there's now a 70% chance of tropical storm force winds, not the storm itself, but just the winds. But if we get to tropical storm force winds, that's likely means that there is a named storm. And the guidance, we'll take a look at some of that in a moment, just headed towards Houston and points off to the south. Now, if you've been with us for the previous week and a half, we can see that into the fourth day of the Central American gyrate, briefly with a smaller storm circulation on the Pacific side. Now, this has Amanda, as it was named in the Pacific, is now across the isthmus and moving and emerging into the Gulf of Mexico, into the Bay of Campeche, and it will get a new name. We'll get to that name in a moment. But as we talked about 2 weeks ago, that once this large-scale circulation begins to manifest, it's like these little guys, which aren't so little, but little in the larger sense of scheme, just are eddies, and they just begin to very naturally show up and will likely keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. Tropical depression number 3 from Jim Cantori has been designated by the National Hurricane Center, the NHC, and has a high likelihood of becoming a tropical storm, Cristobal. So hashtag Cristobal before finding land once again. NHC forecast tropical storm by Tuesday, which is tomorrow, which would make it the earliest to the 3rd named storm of the season on record. Doesn't mean it's going to continue on, but with this larger Central American circulation in place, active easterlies coming off the African continent, slightly above normal temperatures in the Atlantic basin. And I would say we've got a recipe for what will likely be a very active summer and fall. Again, just continuing on the theme of 2020 being an outlier kind of year. Nice bubbling from the remnants of Amanda, with the NHC is now calling investigative area number 93L over the Yucatan this morning, which should emerge into the Bay of Campeche tonight. Then here's with the models. Jim Cantori also retweeting Ryan Mao, who runs weathermodels.com. It's a great site if you're kind of a geeking into these kind of things. Then you'll enjoy his site, and I think in time I'll show a little more of that work to you, because it really is kind of comprehensive. And he's kind of a contrarian when it comes to mainstream points of view and weather. And I'll appreciate contrarians just because they tend to be independent thinkers. So I like to give them kudos for being kind of outside the block, outside the box. South Africa, if we head southward, all-time monthly low record temperatures fell yesterday, May 28th, with widespread snow accompanying the freeze. This guy's attributing it to the looming grand solar minimum. We'll see how that plays out in time. So we're kind of going crazy out there with those kind of things. And this is a temperature plot from last night at about 2 a.m. Eastern, midnight Mountain Time, and already with temperatures in New York State up through New England in the 20s and 30s as this latest cold wave pushed on through. Let's see if I can refresh that right to now, and then bring about a look at the current temperatures, probably 7 o'clock our time, with the heat kind of slithered across Colorado and into the upper Mississippi Valley and over the high plains, with the heat still going on into the desert Southwest, honestly, as you would expect. But in between, we've got the heat here, but on either end of the nation, into the Northwest and then into the Northeast, we have temperatures significantly cooler than normal, and it's easy to see why. If we back out, we can see cool and showers across the Northwest, thunderstorms in Colorado where I am, and then another surge of cool air headed on the heels of what was already a cool couple of days back east. We're going to go south. In fact, I'm going to do that with a close-up and just look at the sunset terminator kind of passing across the Yucatan through the Gulf of Mexico, almost to the Texas coast. And this is where that circulation is going to be. And this will likely be the bigger weather story of the week. All right, we'll start with Colorado, where we've had a little severe weather. There's the Great Sand Dunes National Park here, which was coated in ice, coated in hail today. And I'm about right here where all through up until the 30th of May, all year long, barely and almost exactly 1 inch of rain. And we've had 1 1/3 inches in the last 72 hours. So what had been a rather significant drought is turning around quickly, although this time of year, and as dry as the air is, that inch of rain could be gone in 5 days' time. Just it can go that quickly. So here are largely our 4 areas of precip. Some showers draped across the northern Rockies into the Great Basin, across the Four Corners area, Texas. We're going to talk about Texas a lot as we move through the week. And then another surge of cool weather continued to move through the Great Lakes states associated with this cool front. And then still fire weather out over the Great Basin, where there hasn't been enough water to kind of wet the fuels, as they call them. And with windy conditions, fires can go very, very quickly. Even here today, with the rains that we've had in the last 48, 72 hours, we had a lightning sparked fire. The kindling is that dry. And when you've got lightning inspired temperatures coming down into dry grasses, it happens very, very quickly. Risk of severe weather heads towards the upper Mississippi Valley. Steadier rains through New England in association with those showers that are moving through the Great Lakes states pronto. And then the severe weather threat begins to stretch out across the middle tier of the country. So QPF, because I kind of want to talk about precip and ultimately excessive rains, because that's going to bring up the topic of Texas. And so the showers over the Mountain West, and then that stripe that we'll get tonight, headed across in central, centered on about Lake Erie, and then continuing into day 2, and then into day 3, and then into day 4, we begin to dry out in the Mountain West, but that only lasts a little bit until we get another round of chillier weather coming in from the Northwest. And then say day 6, day 7, let's just run the whole kit and caboodle, and you can see that the Gulf Coast literally just getting hammered with 20, 30 inches of rain likely to come down from Yucatan northbound as this large low will pop over here. Oh, I love my Mac. Does that. Let's start with this guy. Back right on up. So we're looking at the cold high pressure sitting in the Carolinas and drifting off the coast with the south winds coming on up, transporting the moisture back to the Great Lakes states. Then as we begin to work out 15, 24 hours, 32 hours, 48 hours, still showery through the southwest as we move into Thursday morning. The west tries to dry out, but we're interested in this new area, which will likely be our third tropical storm of the season. It is a very, very slow mover. The models earlier today had it making landfall around, well, at least the primary one from the Americans, landfall around Houston. Now it looks like it's more New Orleans, at least this particular one, but then it wants to migrate west all along the coast. And then a great big storm winding up across Canada, lots of wind, lots of rain, heavy rains, especially focused on the front range of those Canadian Rockies. And then even if we keep our eye on the Gulf, another one tries to develop down in that direction. And then even at the end of the period, another round of cool weather for the Northwest, another one for the Northeast. So it looks like we may have had our pattern set for the summer, which would be one of unsettled conditions in the Pacific Northwest and the northeastern states, plenty of water where we've got that Gulf Coast wide open and all that moisture roaring up through the middle part of the nation to feed these cold cells. But as we're kind of beginning to see, or a continuation of that, the cooler weather will have intermittent spells of hot, but the cool weather is going to affect the growing season. Last year, it certainly did, where we have our growing degree days. Very simple formula. Take your nighttime low, your daytime high, add them together, divide by 2, and then subtract from 55. And then you run a daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal total of that number. And there are certain crops like corn that need 2,200 of those numbers, of those growing degree days. Then you go to something like lettuce and bok choy and strawberries that only need mid hundreds, 5, 6, 700 growing degree days before the fruit can come to fruition and the harvest can be brought in. So if we don't get into the warmth, if we don't have those warm nights in particular, then we have farmers as they approach their harvest, whether it's wheat or soy or corn or potatoes, those plants tend to mature later in the season than what they would typically. And if you have harvesters that are on rent that are slated for the second or third week of June, in the case of wheat in Texas, and your crop isn't mature, what do you do? I mean, what do you do? Do you reschedule them? Do you work with them? Do they hang out even though they've got the next field, say, up farther north to go harvest? So it becomes a logistics nightmare. We're already seeing that across the food chain in so many ways. So growing degree days is another thing, adding to the food processing, the transportation, the migrant labor aspect of this. So there's many parts to this weather versus food supply versus factories and processing and then off to market, that is now beginning to show signs of change that we're going to have to be adapt at. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Good to see everybody over there, for Robin, Risa, Chris, Marcy, Risa, and back to Robin, and then Jody. I've been following Scott since 2007. He took me down my first trip through the rabbit hole. Trust me, I haven't come out of that rabbit hole. There's a lot of crazy things going on in the world. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that on Wednesday on Another Perspective, right here at 1 o'clock Mountain. And of course, there's always hashtag replay if you have to work, if you're one of those lucky ones that still gets to go to work and get employed in another way, or you've managed to reinvent yourself in this changing economy. All right, everybody, questions, anything? You got to go. Farmers have to use our Olagaga aquifer. That's getting stressed too with all the irrigation and those surface water irrigation systems, those circles. So much that water simply evaporated out here in the San Luis Valley. it's a desert. It looks like the Aerial Sea in Russia. If you look at the before and after pictures of what this area, the Aerial Sea, looked like before farming, before industrialized farming arrived on the scene, it really, really makes you want to cry. It's just an utter disaster. All right, a little more rain for Colorado, and we're gonna watch the Gulf Coast over the next little while, everybody. Along with dairy and hog farmers. Oh, Risa, there's so many parts to this moving wheel of how we just manage our food system in the coming not only days but weeks, months, and years as well. All right, everybody, take care. I'll see you tomorrow, and have a great night. Keep looking up.